So can you guys first kind of talk about the audiences that you're working with and give us some ideas of how you reach those audiences? Not the story itself, but how are they seeing these stories that you've shown to us today? Either one of you can start.
Well, I'll start. I don't know, Stanley. I mean, in my world now, things are a little different. I do a lot of work for NGOs. Some of those are faith-based NGOs, and they use those images in their projects and other things, which I think is really important because I tend to work for people that I think have the same values, or at least similar values to what I do, and I think that's really important. I also think, guys, if you really want to move your career forward, you've got to do personal projects. I mean, whether you find places to publish them or not, that's probably the strongest marketing tool that you could have, is to do something, even if it's very personal and doesn't mean much outside of your own family. I think that's extremely valuable.
Well, I'm kind of the least tapped into the journalism market of the three of us, and so I'm trying to do work for my career that's more commercial, but I was interested, for instance, in people with visual disabilities, because I had a friend that was losing his vision and had a guide dog, and it was just of interest to me, and I wanted to find a way to give a voice to that. So I knew the president of the Center for the Visually Impaired in Atlanta, and Laurie and I were both interested in doing something, so we just told him, we said, we want to do a project for you. We're not sure what that's going to be, but we'd like to do something. And then we came up with this idea of, and Laurie and I, we always are looking for ways that we can do a project together. So we came up with this idea of me doing the portraits and telling the stories, and her doing the illustrations of what it might be like to see through the eyes of people that are blind. And they liked that idea. So the nice thing about that for me, and the way that I fund my projects, is through grants. So it's harder and harder to get individual artist grants, but by partnering with the Center for the Visually Impaired, they were the ones asking for the grant. So that gave us legitimacy and another level of being able to reach out to different organizations. So we got some money, not enough to, I didn't get enough to stop my day job, but it allowed me to do a story that was important. So, and then what they did with that, they had a catalog printed that they sent out to people that they thought they could, that they wanted to bring in, like legislators, all that kind of stuff, and funders and friends of CVI. And then they've done an exhibit that is both traveling. There are two versions of it. One of them has traveled, and the other one is permanently up at their headquarters in Atlanta, to give new people coming in and their families some insight into what it's like to deal with blindness. And one of the cool things about it was that a lot of ophthalmologists and optometrists and eye specialists had seen the images in the project since then, and they said it gave them some real insight. They had never thought about this how personalized these visual issues were. So I don't think you have to go a traditional path. You don't have to find a magazine or a publication to get your work out. And my favorite thing to do is to create a book. I always like books, and I'm working on several right now. Not all of them are documentary photography books, but there's just something about books that I like. I like the permanence of them. And so my wife happens to be a book producer and designer, and that's been really convenient for me. But the process of working on them is a pretty life-changing thing for me when they come out. So there's tons of different ways to have your work shown. There are people that do guerrilla kind of exhibits on the sides of buildings and with all kinds of different methods. It's a whole new world. A friend of mine, Sherelle Clark, did this great series in Mississippi called the Barrel Gang. It was a group of guys that would hang out in this poor area of Meridian, Mississippi, by this big oil can that they would fill up with wood and light it, and that would provide them some heat, and they would just tell stories, tall tales, and Terrell had been documenting them for a long time. And for the exhibit, he put up a clothesline all around this vacant lot where the barrel gang would hang out, and he hung the photographs up on with clothes clips. So it was just covering this whole area. And they did a story on it in the Meridian newspaper, top of the fold, front page story. And it brought all of these people from all over Meridian to this area to see that show, and it connected the communities. People that probably had never been to that side of town came into that little lot and saw it. So when you're thinking about, I'm doing this project and it's not getting in a magazine, it's, so it's not happening. Creativity and thinking outside the box, I guess he said articulately.
Can you hear me? My voice
Yes.
is okay. So I've had the luxury of, the privilege really, of doing documentary work for University of Georgia, the Institute on Human Development and Disability. And I see one of my colleagues in the back. Hi, Jillian. So glad you made it. And Jillian is responsible, actually, for me getting that gig a number of years ago, because she used to work with the Georgia Advocacy Office, and she's been part of the disability community for a long time. So she would give me story ideas, and because my part-time work with the Institute is pretty loose, you're a photojournalist. Okay, go find stories and go do them. Okay, we do them. Now what do we do with them? Well, we've got to get them out. Okay, you're a journalist, you're connected with the agency, you've got friends in the media, go get them out there. So that's really kind of what I do. We have had a number of documentary projects that I've had the privilege of doing, so I use my filmmaking skills, and I use that very loosely because I never had any training in filmmaking. But I learned as soon as I took the first job, and they said, "Can you do this?" And they said, "Sure." Okay, now I need to learn how to do this, right? So I went to Syracuse University for a week, and National Press Photographers Association multimedia immersion program. And I think it was designed to give old dogs new tricks, and that's what I did. And so as soon as I learned how to do that, and I did a film for the Georgia Council on Developmental Disabilities, and so that got distributed all sorts of ways. Not something that you would buy, but it goes through social media, their website, and that's how those stories got out. And those stories led to the work that I'm doing now, which is you create these films that are totally photojournalistic and cinematic in style. And they get distributed through, they go to different universities, different university centers for disability studies. There's no one way to get that work out there. You have to be creative. And I use social media a lot because I find stories, but I'm not on staff anywhere other than the university. So I don't have a newspaper other than I've started working for the Marietta Daily Journal now. And that is cool. And I'm going to chase a rabbit here real quickly because I started off with a newspaper just outside of Chicago 40 years ago. And my career has brought me all the way back to where I was in this community journalism. And that's what made the difference for Sarah and her son. It was a newspaper. Okay? That just, that just touched my heart. It just, if you do what you love and you love what you do, I keep telling myself the money will follow, right? But
It's way back here.
Yeah, it is somewhere. But I think you have to get yourself out there. Because I use social media to get stories that, hey, this is a cool thing that's happening, And then somebody sees that and they say, oh yeah, that's cool, that's good. And then it becomes a story that gets distributed through Zuma Press. And it gets licensed in places I've never even heard of and can't pronounce. And I might make $1.75 for that picture, but the story's getting out there. And the cumulativeness of that makes it possible for me to keep the lights on. Does that make any sense?
Yes.
Okay. I'll shut up.
I used to work for the Marietta Daily Journal.
Did
That's
you?
the best thing they ever done. I have a copy of a column that a sports writer wrote in 1974. It went straight down the page, so it was the like one of those. He was talking about local race car drivers and how they should be respected just like anybody doing the job, like journalists, like anybody else. The publisher at the time, I'm not making any statements about it, was a great guy. He fired so many photographers that it allowed me to become the chief photographer within a very short period of time, because the chief photographer was always getting fired. Well, this sports writer wrote a column, and if you read the capitalized letter, the first letter of each paragraph straight down the page, it spelled Otis Brumby was the publisher, is a son of a bitch.
Yes.
And it was brilliant. I have a copy of it. And he was fired 3 days later because the word got out and eventually got back to Otis. But he was a great sports writer. Anyway, just that's an aside.
That's fine.
Yes.
3 little questions. Did Marietta ever come back when they asked for more, for a follow-up
Yes.
with pay?
No.
Or they just kept taking from you?
I offered it to them because that was the initial.
Right, you gave them the
I
story,
gave them
but
the
they
story.
came back.
Well, eventually after I did after Sarah left, and it's like, okay, that series of stories has sort of closed because now she's in Colorado. And in conversation with the editor, he says, you might consider doing some part-time work for us. And
Okay, yeah.
yeah, I could use some work. It's nice to eat, and it's nice to pay the bills. They don't pay very much. But you know what it did? It got me reconnected to looking for stories. And it's like, hey, I've got this story idea. Great, we'll take it. It doesn't pay much. $80 for a story with pictures, you can't survive on that. But if it's a good story here, it could be a good story for syndication. So I'll do it for the Marietta paper, and then it also goes to Zuma Press. And it's like, when you are independent, you have to think business.
Yeah.
You also have to think creatively, finding stories. Okay, this is good here, but this makes a great stock picture too, so it goes to here. This might be a great stock picture for this other agency that I worked with supplies images for textbook use. And so you're constantly thinking, how can I multi-purpose these images?
So you're keeping the rights?
Oh,
It's
absolutely.
all your work.
Well, actually, we haven't had that conversation, but I'm not on staff with them, so
You need to have that
I
conversation.
know we do. I know, you're right.
If
But
you need help, we'll all come and have that conversation.
yes. But I think it's in terms of getting the work out there, which is what the question was. No, that wasn't the question. Your question
No,
was,
I just wanted to
now I'm
know
doing-
if the
now I'm
publisher
doing-
came back
yeah,
after
a couple of days a month, I'll do a story, and curiously, they're kind of disability related. So it's like, well, you're not an expert, but you're the closest thing we have to one. So if I did a story about a month ago of this young woman who had, all of a sudden, they discovered this massive brain tumor. And they took it out, and she's like 34, and now she's got to go home because she has, some serious deficits now. So I was just over there the other day after 3 or 4 months at Shepherd Spinal Center. We did pictures there. That was a story. Now it's a follow-up story. 6 months from now, it will be another follow-up story. How has her life changed? It's turned her family's life totally upside down because her parents are elderly, they're retired, and the local readership contributed more money to help this family. And so that's what touches my heart as far as local journalism, is that people take ownership of their community. And yeah, I've done the New York Times stuff and all of that, and you never really see the fruits of that story. Here I did. And that's why I keep doing things for them. I wish they paid more, but
You can't. The black and white, both of you gentlemen are shooting a lot of black and white? Or are you shooting color and preferring to?
I shoot 90% of what I shoot for work is color. A lot of these projects were like in the 80s and 90s and the early 2000s, but then the Blindside was more recent, and I wanted to do something different, so I used a 4x5 and that Polaroid black and white film that comes with a big negative that's so, I mean, it's beautiful, beautiful tones and stuff, so I still like black and white, but it's usually more of a personal decision when I shoot with it.
Yeah, I shoot everything as well in color and desaturate. And basically just so that I can have both versions. I think if it was, and the clients typically want color, so that's kind of, I mean, you're not going to make a living as a black and white photographer in most cases. I mean, there are some outlets for it, but it's tougher. So everything's shot in color. Sometimes it's presented in black and white most of the time.
And you said something about an NGO?
Yeah, I do a lot of NGO work.
Non-governmental agents, organizations. So it's like nonprofit.
Nonprofits, AIDS, yeah, I mean, nonprofits. Yes.
Was that your croc in the baseball picture?
No, that was home plate.
Croc?
Yeah, it was home plate. Yeah, you wear, I don't know anybody wears sandals or anything in that part of the world. Yeah, it's not good. You either get stepped on by animals or you come back with bookworm, one of the two. So yeah, that's not a good shoot away there. Yes.
Well, y'all are probably all pretty well connected with churches. Is it not possible to have a lot of your content, just structure it so that it can be like published from the pulpit? You know, it seems like every Sunday there's a captive audience. Every Sunday they need to have something to look at. Is that not a market?
not a paying one.
You know, there's organizations, I think, that work around the church that I think that probably have some market value to them. I don't know very much, maybe you guys do, I don't know very much in the church that does.
Some churches have budgets to do that, and the big mega churches will have a whole team of multimedia people to go produce things. But in terms of licensing, I think they tend to borrow more so than actually pay for it. And nobody questions that, and it's, you know, I'm not going to die on that hill, but it's
Still not right.
no, it's not. I mean, but it happens. Some churches, I mean, there are some, and I've done work for Billy Graham Evangelistic Association, done work for World Magazine, and they're faith-based, and they don't pay a whole lot, but they do pay something, and they're usually good stories. So, as far as individual churches, that's likely not going to happen. Although I did years ago work for Charles Stanley a bit, First Baptist Atlanta. And curiously, because he's a photographer, and he said to me, and this was, gosh, 25 years ago, he says, no, and I did some work for his magazine, which I believe was called In Touch. And he said, now you make sure you send us a bill. And of course, you know, I'm a fairly new believer at the time, and it's like, oh, I want to do it for the glory of God and everything. You send us a bill, because every person is due their wages. And he was very adamant about that. You send us a bill. You're not doing this for free. So I've thought about that because I was involved in ministry work for a number of years as a photojournalist. And There were a lot of times that I think churches and a lot of businesses with the fish on the door would sometimes expect that you're going to do it for God's glory. Which, yes, but you also have to make a living, you know, so it's a very fine line to walk. And, you know, I can't tithe if I don't get any money to tithe with, you know, so, you know, you kind of like have to pay. You know, I mean, putting in pictures in the collection plate just doesn't fly, and you can't buy groceries with a photo credit, you know, so.
I think in Atlanta's a volunteer kind of town, and as a photographer, somebody with something that can help people promote their things, you're always going to be asked to, you know, donate a picture or donate your time to do some photography. And so, to me, what I like to do is pick organizations that I have a connection to and do projects with them. I like to do projects, so I work with different organizations. I come up with the ideas, or they've got something that they're doing that appeals to me, and I'll work on that. And then when other people ask, you know, if I can do something for free, I can say, you know, I love that kind of work, but I'm already doing, you know, I'm already doing that for as many as I can handle right now. So you get to have more control over that, and you do the kind of projects you want to do, and then you don't have to feel bad when you're not able to, you know, do work for everybody. And there are a lot of good projects out there and good people that need some support with photography and writing, and it's meaningful to do those jobs. But like Robin said, you can't pay the bills with that, so you have to be judicious in it. And for the most part, people are completely understanding of that.
Somewhere, somehow, Stanley, I know he's talked about this, is creating a funding mechanism, a nonprofit organization to help fund photojournalistic projects for other nonprofit organizations. And I think that's an awesome idea, because there's a lot of groups out there that they don't have the money to hire somebody to do a first-rate job in telling their stories. But if there was a mechanism in place whereby Arthur Blank, somebody who's got deep pockets, see the value in having missions, missionaries, church organizations, projects, passions, having those pictures created professionally to tell their stories. That would get their stories out in powerful ways and allow journalists who are independent to put food on the table, right? And it would make the person who's funding that feel really good about what they're doing.
Right.
So, and I think that's something that really could be explored. And I know Stanley, we've talked about that for a while.
Yeah, we have a couple of programs like that in Chattanooga that help fund small projects. They're not large projects, but they help fund small ones, and there's been a lot of success with them.
I was thinking in Atlanta, and I'm not a photographer, I'm here because of Robin, but there's the Greater Atlanta Community Foundation, which funds all kinds of large and small community building kind of grants, and it occurred to me at this moment in history, particularly with youth in high school, it could be really powerful to me if you were a photographer to contact your local high school and say, you know, I'm willing to take on one photography student as to mentor and try to help empower a young person who wants to document their life and document particularly this moment in history with young people, trying to keep their schools safe and trying to be engaged in, you know, really very political social justice moment for high school students. And it just seems to me, because I've worked in the nonprofit world for many years, that places like the Greater Atlanta Community Foundation, and you know, there's other foundations, the one Robin mentioned, but they're all over the place, especially in the Atlanta area. They're very interested in unique projects, you know, and especially projects that are empowering youth. you know, are supporting diversity in our communities. It seems to me there's a kind of a niche that a photographer could, I mean, you have to look for it, but if you looked in your local community, wherever your local community is, like your local high school, you could find some currency there. Because I know the object obviously is to try to make a living, what you love to do, but sometimes you have to put it out there to attract the money to it.
We're running a little over, but that's okay. Why don't we take one or two more questions, but just want to toss out, I'll ask Billy and maybe Mark to help me with this. Inspiring, what are some questions that you wish your students would ask, since they have three quite world-class storytellers up here, that they should be asking that they haven't asked maybe? From a student perspective, is there something that they should be asking people who, you guys have had to remake your careers 3 or 4 times, I would assume, to consistently be doing what you're doing now?
I think that's the main thing is patience. It's like, we've all been doing this for a long time, 30, 40 years, and everything is like one step at a time. You know, I started out working for the Fayette Neighbor newspaper as a writer, making $125 a week. And after the end of the first year, they gave me a $5 raise because I'd done so well. A $5 a week raise, $130 a week. And that's actually when I decided I wanted to be the photographer. And they said, yeah, knock yourself out. So everything is one step at a time, and then being open to opportunities. I had an opportunity to help some people with they were putting together an art show with artwork created by the homeless, and they wanted to have a photography component. So I put together an exhibit which became a book called Can You See Me, which was images by 33 different Atlanta photographers of Atlanta's homeless. And we raised money with that book that went to the Task Force for the Homeless and the Atlanta Community Food Bank. And that was my first taste of doing something like that, a book and a project, and it kind of took me to the next phase. And everything you do, every time you create something and you do a project and you complete it, it gives you a little more legitimacy that you can show for the next thing you want to do. And so the thing to do is to think about the things that are important to you, what you want to cover, what you want your pictures to convey, find an opportunity to get it out there and complete a project, and then that will lead to the next thing and the next thing. And you can't decide what it's going to be right now. You'll find it when it's like the Rilke thing that, you know, that life, don't look for the answer, look for the question. So, and you'll finally work yourself into the answer. But that's what your life is. It's that path.
Stanley, it's kind of interesting right now because my students we're right in the middle of beginning photo projects as you know, semester starts winding down at this point, and we're in the middle of finding photo projects, and so they have an assignment to write a proposal to me that I won't get this Monday because they're on spring break next week, but the following, and they had to present a topic to me this week. So topics are easy usually. Usually you get topics. All of us have topics. And when it becomes more difficult is to go from a topic to an actual proposal to something that's actually doable. And I make them, you know, I make them do social issues. You can't come to the class with, you know, with just I want to do a day in the life of this or a day in the life of that. That doesn't make it. You know, very few people are, well, number one, day in the lives tend to be shallow. That's not always the case, but they tend to be shallow and they're not good projects most of the time. So the takeaway from that is that you need to do research to define a topic, then you need to do more research to define the story, and then you actually have to go and do the story, and which means you have to spend time with the subjects, and you have to understand the subject, and you're probably wasting your time if you have a subject that agrees to do the story but only lets you be there on certain times. You've really got to dive into that issue. That's a tough thing to deal with for a young student. And it's a tough thing to deal with for an old teacher like me. It's hard. But those are personal projects, and maybe the projects for some, for some companies or for some outlets, but those are the projects that define careers. Right? That's how you get from point A to a career, is to start figuring out how to do the research, because it's the research that pays the dividends, and the questions and the photos.
And you have to, I think you really have to pour yourself into what it is you care about.
Yeah, or hate.
Well, that too,
One
yeah,
of the two.
right. So that's how my whole thing with the disability that got started, really. I was doing pictures of what they call a futures planning for this young girl who lived close to us. And I was there with my camera, watching her diagram, watching this person, and it was Dottie actually, Jillian, who was doing this path for this young person with a developmental disability, like my son. We lived maybe 2 miles apart. So I was over there and I had my camera, and Dottie, who worked with the Georgia Council on Developmental Disabilities, said, would you be interested in, I see you have a camera, would you be interested in doing a documentary project for our state council? And I said, sure, and never shot cinema ever. Had no idea how I would do that, but I said, sure, I would love to do that. Great, we have to have the contract signed in 3 days. And it was about a 14-month contract, and I said yes, and then went to school to learn how to do multimedia immersion. Yes, exactly. and that's what started
May 15th through 19th, Syracuse.
Yes, and it's awesome.
NPPA.org.
And every photojournalist needs to cross-platform. You're not just a photographer. If you are, you are going to be working at Walmart. Seriously, you need to write. You need to use all the tools at your disposal. I forced myself to write even though I am not a writer. These guys, they do this. They both came from more writing background. And I started off as a reporter.
I didn't.
You didn't?
I didn't come from a writing background. You probably saw some of the words up there. There were lots of mistakes in those things. My writing background is going downstairs and have my wife fix it.
But it's like, these are all tools. Okay? We cannot silo ourselves and just say, I'm a photographer, that's all I do. Because you will not survive in this business. And I'm talking to the students, people who say they want to do this. You need to write, you need to know how to do pictures and editing and sound and learn how to edit this thing to make compelling projects. Stories. And it's all about the story, okay? It really is. And if your sound is horrible, people are going to tune you out. And we are a short attention span society now. And if you're going to do a video project, documentary or whatever, you better have a hook. You better draw them in the first 15 seconds or you've lost them. And they'll go on to something else.
Billy, how has your students changed over the last umpteen years you've been teaching in terms of what you see different than you saw?
Well, I've been an adjunct for like 30 years, and then I've been full-time now for, this is my 4th semester. So you know what, in the beginning, I think I saw students who really wanted to do nothing but photos. That's not true anymore. Everything is, as Robin was saying, is multimedia based now. And I think early on, and when I first started teaching, I was pretty much the same age. As a matter of fact, my first day of teaching ever, I walked in and actually sat in the back of the room and didn't tell them I was a teacher and just sat there. And part of that was out of fear, and part of it was that, oh my goodness, I got to stand up in front of somebody and tell them what I know, and I really didn't know very much, and so it was kind of hard. But those students changed my life. They really did. They came with a lot of enthusiasm, and what I lacked in teaching skills, they brought in energy, and we figured it out together. And I still talk to those guys, many of those guys today. The students I have today, believe it or not, I don't believe have a very good background in storytelling. I think that the university that I teach at, the one that I love dearly, and is my university, I think the department I'm in, which is a communications department, is built more on TV than it is on photojournalism, and I think there is a little difference in TV and photojournalism. So I get students that come from a different perspective, and you know, and everything, as Robin was saying, you have to get to the point quickly today. So it's a little bit of a different perspective. They're still good students. They're just different kind of student. And I love them dearly. I do. I would go to work for them, and have, and still am.
Why don't we thank them for their time, and you can stand